The handcuffs felt cold against my wrists as Officer Martinez guided me down the marble steps of the Thompson mansion. I kept my head down, watching my sensible black shoes navigate each step while the neighborhood watched from behind their perfectly manicured hedges. 43 years I'd worked, 30 in the federal courthouse as a court clerk, 15 here as Eleanor's companion, and now I was being paraded like a common criminal. There she goes. Marcus Thompson's voice carried across the pristine lawn. The woman who betrayed my mother's trust for $50,000 worth of jewelry. I glanced back once. Marcus stood on the portico in his expensive suit, pointing at me with theatrical outrage. The Cartier watch on his wrist probably cost more than most people's cars. Behind him, the living room windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, the same room where Eleanor's jewelry box had allegedly been ransacked. Mrs. Henderson from next door clutched her pearls, literally. The Johnsons whispered behind their Range Rover. I could feel their judgment, their certainty that the help had finally shown her true colors. Let them think that. Let them all think that. Officer Martinez opened the patrol car door. "Watch your head, ma'am." "Thank you, officer." My voice came out smaller than intended, which was perfect. In 30 years of federal court proceedings, I'd learned that appearing helpless often revealed more truth than demanding respect. As we drove away, I studied the police report over the officer's shoulder. Alleged theft occurred between March 15th and 18th. Interesting. I'd been in Sacramento those dates, attending my sister's funeral. My airline receipts were still in my purse, along with the hotel bill and program from the memorial service. Marcus had been sloppy with his timeline, a mistake I'd seen destroy many cases in Judge Richardson's courtroom. The Miranda rights echoed in my ears, but my mind was already working differently. Not as Dorothy Williams, the grieving domestic employee, but as the woman who'd cataloged evidence for 3 decades, who'd watched attorneys build and demolish cases with the precision of master craftsmen. At the station, they photographed and fingerprinted me with clinical efficiency. "Do you understand the charges against you?" Detective Brooks asked. "I think so." I made my voice waver slightly. "Grand theft, they said, but I never." Eleanor trusted me with everything. Mrs. Thompson's son has provided a detailed statement about missing jewelry, including a diamond necklace valued at $50,000. I nodded meekly, but my experienced eye caught the inconsistencies in the paperwork. The alleged theft date was wrong. The description of the necklace matched one Eleanor had shown me in her safety deposit box just last month, a fact I documented in my personal calendar, as was my habit from years of court scheduling. "Ma'am, do you have an attorney?" I don't know any attorneys." The lie came easily. I knew dozens from my courthouse years, but Dorothy the domestic worker wouldn't have those connections. Detective Brooks softened. "The court will appoint someone for you." After processing, they released me on my own recognizance, another sign that even the police found the charges questionable. I caught a taxi back to my small apartment in Culver City, grateful to be away from Marcus's performance and the neighbors' stares. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my laptop, the same one I'd used to help Eleanor organize her charitable giving spreadsheets. The screen reflected my face, 68 years old, gray hair slightly mussed from the day's ordeal, reading glasses perched on my nose. I looked exactly like what Marcus expected, a confused elderly woman overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her comprehension. Perfect. I opened a new document, titled Case Notes Williams v. Thompson, and began typing with the methodical precision that had made me Judge Richardson's most valued clerk. If Marcus Thompson thought he could frame me using sloppy police work and public humiliation, he was about to learn why you should never underestimate someone who'd spent 3 decades watching the justice system operate. Dorothy Williams might appear to be just the help, but she was about to remind everyone that court clerks see everything, remember everything, and document everything. Marcus had made his first critical error by underestimating his opponent. Now I just needed to gather the evidence to prove it. The miniature surveillance camera was no bigger than a button, purchased with cash from an electronics store in downtown LA. I'd learned about such devices during the Federal Privacy Act hearings I'd transcribed in Judge Richardson's chambers. Amazing what you absorb when you're invisible to everyone in the room. I waited until Marcus left for his usual Tuesday golf game at Riviera Country Club, a routine Eleanor had complained about for years. Every Tuesday, Dorothy, like clockwork, never misses it, even when I was having my treatments. The gate code hadn't changed since Eleanor passed away 3 months ago. Marcus was predictable in his arrogance. The Thompson mansion felt different without Eleanor's presence. Colder somehow, despite the California sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved through the rooms I'd cleaned and organized for 15 years. But now I was documenting everything with the systematic precision I'd used for federal case files. The living room where the theft allegedly occurred was exactly as I remembered. I positioned the first camera behind Eleanor's favorite orchid, a phalaenopsis she'd named Margaret after her mother. The angle would capture anyone entering or leaving the jewelry armoire. My phone buzzed. A text from my court-appointed attorney. Meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. to discuss plea options. Plea options. As if I'd actually taken anything from Eleanor Thompson, the woman who'd trusted me with her medical appointments, her bank statements, her deepest fears about Marcus's gambling debts. The woman who'd whispered to me just weeks before she passed away, "Dorothy, I'm worried about what will happen to everything when I'm gone." I installed the second camera in the hallway, disguised within the frame of a family photo, one of the few that still included Eleanor. Marcus had already removed most traces of his mother from the common areas, eager to redecorate with his girlfriend Stephanie's modern sensibilities. The dining room provided the perfect vantage point for camera 3. Hidden behind the crystal chandelier Eleanor had inherited from her own mother, it would capture anyone accessing the main safe behind the Monet reproduction. I knew the combination. Eleanor had shared it during one of her anxious episodes about Marcus's creditors, Mrs. Williams. The voice startled me. I spun around to find James, the groundskeeper, standing in the doorway. My heart hammered, but I forced my expression into confused helplessness. "Oh, James, you frightened me." I clutched my chest dramatically. I needed to collect some of my personal things before... I let my voice break slightly. His weathered face softened. "I'm real sorry about all this, Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Thompson always spoke highly of you. This whole situation doesn't sit right with me." "Thank you, James. That means more than you know." After he left, I completed my surveillance installation with renewed urgency. The fourth camera went in Eleanor's former bedroom, now Marcus's domain. I positioned it to monitor the nightstand where Eleanor had kept her most valuable pieces, the ones Marcus claimed I'd stolen. That evening, I returned to my apartment and activated the monitoring system on my laptop. 4 camera feeds displayed the Thompson mansion in real time. I felt like those FBI agents I'd assisted with wiretap transcriptions back in the 90s, except this time, I was both investigator and victim. My phone rang. "Dorothy?" The voice was familiar. Linda Chen, Eleanor's estate attorney. "Linda, hello. I just heard about the charges. This is absolutely ridiculous. Eleanor trusted you completely." "I know, but Marcus seems convinced." "Marcus is desperate for money, Dorothy. His gambling debts are worse than Eleanor ever imagined. I have documentation of payments to Vegas casinos, offshore accounts, loan sharks. Eleanor was trying to restructure her will to protect her assets." My pulse quickened. "Restructure how?" "She wanted to establish a trust that would limit Marcus's access to the estate." "She was going to make you a trustee, Dorothy, because she knew you'd handle everything with integrity." After Linda hung up, I opened a new spreadsheet titled Financial Timeline, Thompson Estate. In my years managing court dockets, I'd learned that money trails never lie. Eleanor's concerns about Marcus weren't paranoid delusions. They were legitimate fears based on documented evidence. Around midnight, my surveillance system chimed softly. Movement in the mansion. I watched Marcus stumble through the front door, clearly intoxicated. He headed straight for Eleanor's former bedroom, where he began searching through drawers with frantic urgency. Even through the grainy camera feed, his desperation was obvious. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "It's me. Yeah, the old lady bought the story completely. No, she has no idea what we're really dealing with. By Friday, or those guys from Vegas are going to break more than just my kneecaps." I grabbed my notebook and began transcribing every word, using the shorthand skills that had made me indispensable in federal court. Marcus continued, "The jewelry was just the beginning, man. Once she's convicted and out of the picture, I can access everything without that meddling court clerk breathing down my neck." Court clerk. He knew exactly who I was. Marcus ended the call and walked directly to the hidden safe, entering the combination with practiced ease. He removed several items I couldn't identify through the camera, but his body language suggested relief. I saved the video file and cross-referenced it with the timeline Linda had mentioned. Marcus wasn't just framing me for theft. He was systematically liquidating Eleanor's estate before the legal system could intervene. But he'd made a crucial error. He'd just confessed to fraud while being recorded by someone who understood exactly how to preserve evidence for federal prosecution. The theater of innocence was working perfectly. Marcus believed he was manipulating a helpless elderly domestic worker, when in reality, he'd just handed 30 years of federal court experience everything needed to destroy him. Eleanor's voice still echoed through my memory as I sat reviewing the estate documents Linda had quietly provided. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something that's been keeping me awake at night. That conversation happened just 6 weeks before she passed away, in the sunroom where she liked to tend her orchids. I'd been helping her organize her medications, a rainbow of pills that seemed to multiply each week. The oncologist had been optimistic about her treatment response, but Eleanor seemed to grow weaker instead of stronger. "Marcus has been asking about my will again," she'd whispered, glancing toward the door as if he might materialize. "Very specific questions about the trust fund, about liquid assets. Yesterday I caught him in my bedroom going through my jewelry box. Did you ask him about it? He said he was looking for photos of his father." Eleanor's laugh had been bitter. "As if I keep family photos in my jewelry case." I remembered setting down her pill organizer and giving her my full attention. In 30 years of court proceedings, I'd learned to recognize when someone was building up to crucial testimony. "There's more, isn't there?" Eleanor nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "Last month, when I was so sick after the chemotherapy, Marcus brought me documents to sign. He said they were insurance forms, routine paperwork, but I was so foggy from the medication. What kind of documents? I don't remember clearly, but yesterday I found copies in his room. They weren't insurance forms, Dorothy. They were changes to my will, amendments to the trust structure. My signature, but..." She paused, touching her throat. "I never agreed to those changes. The implications had hit me immediately. In federal court, I'd transcribed dozens of fraud cases involving forged signatures and coerced elderly victims. The pattern was always the same: isolation, medication-induced confusion, and family members with financial motivations. "Eleanor, we need to document this properly. How do we prove it? It's my word against his, and half the time I can barely remember what day it is." That's when I'd suggested the recordings. Not for legal purposes initially, just to help her organize her thoughts and concerns. Eleanor had been surprised by my technical knowledge until I explained my background with federal wiretap transcriptions. Over the following weeks, Eleanor had documented everything: Marcus's gambling debts, his girlfriend Stephanie's expensive shopping habits, the threatening phone calls from creditors. She'd also recorded her suspicions about her medical treatment. "My symptoms are getting worse, not better," she'd whispered into her phone during one of our recording sessions. "Dr. Peterson said the cancer was responding well to treatment, but I feel like I'm being poisoned. Marcus insists on preparing my medications personally now. Says he wants to help, but..." I'd encouraged her to speak with Dr. Peterson directly, but Eleanor was afraid of seeming paranoid. "What if I'm wrong, Dorothy? What if the medication is just affecting my mind?" Now, reviewing the medical timeline Linda had provided, Eleanor's concerns looked prophetic rather than paranoid. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly in the final month, just as Marcus's financial pressures had intensified. The recordings were still on Eleanor's phone, which I'd quietly retrieved from her nightstand after she passed away. Marcus had been too busy with funeral arrangements and estate planning to notice one missing device among Eleanor's many possessions. I plugged the phone into my laptop and began transferring the audio files. Eleanor's voice filled my apartment, weak but determined. March 3rd, Dorothy's suggestion. Marcus came to my room again tonight with more papers. Said they were medical power of attorney updates. I pretended to be too tired to review them, but I took photos with my phone after he left. The photos were still on the device. Legal documents that would transfer significant assets to Marcus immediately upon Eleanor's death, bypassing the trust protections she'd worked years to establish. The signatures looked like Eleanor's, but having transcribed hundreds of handwriting analysis cases, I could see the subtle differences that suggested forgery. March 10th, Eleanor's voice continued. Feeling much worse today, Marcus brought my evening medications personally again. There's a bitter taste that wasn't there before. I'm going to start pretending to take them, then disposing of them after he leaves. March 18th. This will probably be my last recording. I'm too weak to continue, but I needed to document my suspicions. If something happens to me, Dorothy, please make sure the truth comes out. Marcus isn't just stealing my money. I believe he's hastening my death to get it. The recording ended with Eleanor's labored breathing. She passed away 4 days later. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the evidence surrounding me. Forged legal documents, audio recordings of a dying woman's fears, financial records showing Marcus's desperate need for money. The pieces formed a picture far worse than simple theft. Marcus hadn't just stolen jewelry. He'd systematically defrauded his dying mother and possibly accelerated her death through medication tampering. The false accusations against me were just the final step in covering his tracks. But Eleanor had trusted me with the truth, and 30 years of federal court experience had taught me exactly how to present that truth in ways that prosecutors couldn't ignore. Opened a new case file titled People vs. Marcus Thompson, Evidence Summary, and began organizing everything with the methodical precision that had made me Judge Richardson's most trusted. Clerk, Eleanor deserved justice, and I was going to make sure she got it. My court-appointed attorney, David Hernandez, spread the prosecution's evidence across his cluttered desk like he was dealing cards. Dorothy, I have to be honest with you. The district attorney's office has a strong case. I adjusted my reading glasses and studied the documents with the trained eye of someone who'd reviewed thousands of legal filings. May I examine the chain of custody reports? David looked surprised. You understand legal terminology? I watch a lot of Law and Order, I replied with a gentle smile, maintaining my harmless elderly woman persona. The chain of custody documentation was sloppy, evidence logged incorrectly, timestamps that didn't align with the police report, and witness statements that contradicted each other. In Judge Richardson's courtroom, such procedural errors would have resulted in evidence suppression motions. David, when did the police say the theft occurred? March 15th through 18th, according to Marcus Thompson's statement. I pulled out my airline receipts and funeral program. I was in Sacramento attending my sister's funeral during those exact dates. I have hotel bills, rental car receipts, and about 50 witnesses who can verify my presence there. David's eyes widened. Why didn't you mention this during booking? I was overwhelmed. Sometimes us older folks need time to gather our thoughts. That afternoon, my surveillance system captured Marcus making another crucial error. He met with a man in an expensive suit in the mansion's library, the same room where Eleanor had hidden her most important documents. I recognized the visitor from courthouse appearances, Jonathan Blackwood, a lawyer who'd been sanctioned multiple times for ethical violations. Through the hidden camera, I watched Marcus hand Blackwood several legal documents. The insurance policies need to be processed immediately, Marcus said, before anyone starts asking uncomfortable questions about the will modifications, insurance policies. Eleanor had never mentioned additional life insurance beyond her standard coverage. I grabbed my transcription notebook and began recording their conversation in shorthand. Your mother's signatures look convincing, Blackwood replied, examining the papers. My forger does excellent work. But what about the domestic worker? If she starts talking about your mother's suspicions, Dorothy Williams is just a senile old maid who doesn't understand what's happening. The theft charges will discredit anything she tries to say, senile old maid. If only they knew they were being recorded by someone who'd transcribed federal racketeering cases. What about the medication timeline? Blackwood continued. If they order an autopsy, too late for that. Mom's been cremated for months. Besides, who's going to suspect a devoted son of anything improper? I stopped transcribing and stared at the screen. They were discussing Eleanor's death, as if it had been planned, not natural progression of her illness. The medication timeline Blackwood mentioned suggested they'd accelerated her death systematically. Marcus walked to Eleanor's desk and retrieved a folder marked, "Medical Records, Confidential." Dr. Peterson has been very cooperative about adjusting the treatment notes. Amazing how financial pressure motivates professional ethics. Dr. Peterson, Eleanor's oncologist, the one who'd assured her the cancer was responding well to treatment. If he'd been falsifying medical records to cover up medication tampering, this case had just escalated beyond simple theft into conspiracy and potential murder. The Medicare fraud documentation needs to disappear too, Marcus continued. Mom never knew I was billing for home care services that never happened, medical equipment she never received. That's an additional $200,000 in fraudulent claims. Medicare fraud. Federal charges. This conversation was providing evidence of crimes that would involve FBI prosecution rather than local district attorneys. Blackwood gathered the documents. I'll handle the insurance processing and medical record modifications. You focus on making sure Dorothy Williams goes to prison for theft. Once she's discredited and locked up, no one will believe anything she might remember about your mother's concerns. After Blackwood left, Marcus made a phone call that sealed his fate. Stephanie? Yeah, it's working perfectly. The old lady took the bait completely. No, she has no idea we've been planning this since Mom's diagnosis. By next week, we'll have access to everything and Dorothy will be someone else's problem. I saved the video file and began cross-referencing Marcus's admissions with the evidence Eleanor had gathered. The scope of his crimes was staggering. Forged wills, insurance fraud, Medicare billing fraud, medical record falsification, and quite possibly murder through systematic poisoning. But Marcus had made one fatal error in his arrogance. He dismissed me as a senile, old maid, while confessing to federal crimes in front of surveillance, equipment operated by someone who understood exactly how to preserve evidence for prosecution. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to a former colleague from my courthouse days, Special Agent Patricia Wong, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Patricia had worked dozens of Medicare fraud cases during my tenure, and she'd know exactly which federal prosecutors to contact. The subject line read, "Urgent, multi-jurisdictional fraud case requiring federal intervention." Marcus Thompson thought he was manipulating a helpless domestic worker. He was about to discover that underestimating a federal court clerk with 30 years of experience was the most dangerous miscalculation of his life. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. "If something happens to me, Dorothy, please make sure the truth comes out. Justice was coming, and it would arrive with the full weight of the federal government behind it." Special Agent Patricia Wong hadn't changed much in the 15 years since I'd last transcribed one of her financial crimes investigations. Still sharp-eyed, still methodical. Still the kind of federal agent who could spot Medicare fraud from 3 filing cabinets away. Dorothy Williams. She smiled as I entered the FBI field office conference room. "Judge Richardson always said you were the best court clerk he'd ever worked with. Said you could organize evidence better than most attorneys. Patricia, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Your email mentioned multi-jurisdictional fraud with federal implications. That gets my attention quickly." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Tell me everything." I opened my briefcase and spread the documentation across the table with the systematic precision I'd used for 30 years. Audio recordings, video surveillance, forged legal documents, medical records, insurance policies, and a comprehensive timeline that connected every piece of evidence. Eleanor Thompson died 3 months ago after what appeared to be a natural progression of cancer. Her son Marcus has accused me of stealing jewelry to cover up a much larger scheme involving Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, and what I believe was systematic poisoning. Patricia's expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. "Walk me through the evidence." I started with Eleanor's recordings, playing the audio, where she expressed fears about Marcus tampering with her medications. Patricia took notes in the rapid shorthand I remembered from our courthouse days. "Here's the Medicare documentation. I handed her the files Marcus had mentioned during his recorded confession. Eleanor never received the home care services listed here. No medical equipment was ever delivered. But Marcus has been billing Medicare for over $200,000 in fraudulent claims across 18 months. Patricia examined the billing codes with practiced expertise. These are sophisticated fraudulent submissions. Someone with medical industry knowledge helped create these. Dr. Peterson, Eleanor's oncologist. I have video of Marcus discussing how financial pressure motivated his professional ethics regarding treatment note. Modifications. I played the surveillance recording where Marcus and Jonathan Blackwood discussed the falsified medical records. Patricia's jaw tightened as she heard the casual discussion of covering up potential murder through cremation. The insurance policies were also fraudulent, I continued. Eleanor never signed applications for the additional life insurance coverage Marcus is now claiming. I have handwriting analysis showing signature forgery, plus audio of Eleanor expressing confusion about documents Marcus brought her to sign during medication-induced episodes. Patricia studied the insurance documents. $500,000 in coverage purchased 6 months before her death, with Marcus as sole beneficiary. Classic life insurance fraud pattern. There's more. I pulled out the will modification documents. Eleanor had established trust protections to limit Marcus's access to her estate due to his gambling debts. These forged amendments bypass all those protections, giving him immediate access to approximately $2 million in assets. $2 million plus $500,000 in insurance, plus $200,000 in Medicare fraud. Patricia calculated quickly. Almost $3 million in fraudulent gains. That's definitely federal prosecution territory. I saved the most damning evidence for last. This morning's surveillance captured Marcus meeting with representatives from Las Vegas casino groups. He owes significant gambling debts to organizations with violent collection methods. Eleanor's death wasn't just financial opportunity, it was survival necessity. Patricia reviewed the timeline I'd constructed, connecting Marcus's increasing financial desperation with Eleanor's deteriorating health and the acceleration of fraudulent activities. Dorothy, this is incredibly comprehensive documentation. You've essentially built the entire federal case for us. 30 years in federal court teaches you how prosecutors think. What triggered Marcus to accuse you of theft? Linda Chen, Eleanor's estate attorney, was asking questions about the will modifications. Marcus needed a distraction and a scapegoat. An elderly domestic worker accused of stealing jewelry would discredit any concerns I might raise about Eleanor's suspicions. Patricia nodded grimly. Except he didn't realize he was framing someone with federal law enforcement experience. The jewelry theft charges are completely fabricated. I was in Sacramento during the alleged theft dates, attending my sister's funeral. I have documentary proof of my location. But Marcus was sloppy with his timeline because he never expected anyone to check. We'll need to coordinate with local prosecutors about dismissing those charges. Once we begin federal proceedings, Patricia, gather the evidence files. Dorothy, I need to ask, why did you document everything so meticulously? Most victims would have just defended themselves against the theft charges. I thought about Eleanor's final recording, her weakened voice asking me to make sure the truth came out. Eleanor trusted me with her fears about Marcus. She died believing her son was poisoning her, and she was probably right. I couldn't let him profit from her murder while destroying my reputation as a cover-up. We'll need to exhume Eleanor's body for toxicology analysis. That might be difficult. Marcus had her cremated immediately after death, claiming it was her wish. But Eleanor had always planned on burial next to her husband. Patricia's expression darkened. Destroying evidence of poisoning. That's consciousness of guilt in federal court. Over the next 2 hours, Patricia and I organized the evidence into prosecution-ready files. Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and potential murder. Each charge carried federal penalties that would ensure Marcus spent decades in prison. We'll coordinate with LAPD to maintain the theft case facade while building the federal charges, Patricia explained. Marcus needs to believe his plan is working until we're ready to arrest him. How long do you need? 2 weeks maximum. We'll need search warrants for the medical records, financial institutions, and Marcus's communications. Your surveillance evidence provides probable cause for everything. As I left the FBI building, I felt the satisfaction of someone who'd spent 30 years watching justice operate efficiently. Marcus Thompson had underestimated the wrong elderly woman, and federal law enforcement was about to remind him why that was a career-ending mistake. Eleanor would finally get the justice she deserved. The federal evidence room felt like home. 30 years of organizing case files had prepared me for this moment, building an airtight prosecution that would honor Eleanor's memory and expose every aspect of Marcus's criminal enterprise. Agent Wong had assembled a task force, FBI Financial Crimes, Medicare Fraud Investigation Unit, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I sat at the conference table surrounded by federal agents who treated my documentation with the respect usually reserved for seasoned investigators. Mrs. Williams, your evidence organization rivals anything we've seen from professional law enforcement, said Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez. Every document is properly authenticated, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Federal court clerks learn to think like prosecutors, I replied. Judge Richardson always said that sloppy documentation was the fastest way to lose a case. Agent Wong spread my surveillance videos across multiple monitors. Walk us through the timeline again, Dorothy. We need to understand how Marcus coordinated all these fraudulent activities. I approached the evidence board with the confidence I'd gained from decades of case presentations. January 15th. Eleanor confides her suspicions about Marcus accessing her jewelry and asking specific questions about liquid assets. Same day, first fraudulent Medicare claim is submitted for non-existent physical therapy sessions. February 3rd. Marcus meets with Jonathan Blackwood to discuss estate planning modifications. Based on my surveillance, this is when they began forging Eleanor's signature on will amendments and insurance applications. Medicare fraud investigator James Chen highlighted the billing timeline. The fraudulent claims accelerate significantly in February. Home oxygen equipment, mobility aids, nursing services, none of which Eleanor ever received. February 20th. Eleanor begins recording her concerns about medication tampering. She mentions bitter taste in evening pills that Marcus personally prepared. Dr. Peterson's medical notes from this period describe unexpected treatment complications. Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez studied the medical documentation. We've obtained search warrants for Dr. Peterson's complete files. If he was falsifying treatment records to cover systematic poisoning, we'll find the evidence. March 1st. Eleanor's condition deteriorates rapidly. Marcus increases fraudulent Medicare billing to maximum allowable amounts, suggesting he knew her death was imminent. Agent Wong paused the surveillance video at a crucial frame. This recording from March 10th shows Marcus discussing timeline acceleration with casino representatives. He needed Eleanor's death to occur before creditors took violent action. March 22nd. Eleanor passes away. Marcus immediately arranges cremation to destroy evidence of poisoning, then files insurance claims within 48 hours. The grief-stricken son act was completely fabricated. April 15th. Marcus accuses me of jewelry theft precisely when estate attorney Linda Chen begins questioning will modifications. The timing isn't coincidental. He needed to discredit the one person Eleanor had confided her suspicions to. I handed Martinez a folder containing my methodical reconstruction of Marcus's financial desperation. Las Vegas casino debt $400,000. Credit card debt $150,000. His girlfriend Stephanie's shopping expenses $75,000 in 3 months. Total financial pressure over $600,000. Against Eleanor's estate value of approximately $2.5 million plus $500,000 in fraudulent life insurance. Agent Wong calculated. More than enough motivation for murder. Chen examined the Medicare documentation with professional expertise. The billing patterns show intimate knowledge of Medicare fraud detection systems. Someone with inside access to billing codes and approval processes assisted with these submissions. Dr. Peterson, I confirmed. Marcus' recorded conversation mentions financial pressure motivating professional ethics. I believe Peterson was being blackmailed or bribed to participate in the fraud. Martinez reviewed the legal implications. We have evidence for Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, forgery. conspiracy, and potentially murder. This case will result in decades of federal prison time. Agent Wong activated secure communication protocols. We're coordinating with DEA to analyze Eleanor's medication timeline and any remaining pharmaceutical evidence. If Marcus was using prescription drugs to accelerate her death, we'll establish the method. The cremation destroys direct toxicology evidence, Chen noted, but we can prove systematic access to lethal dosages through pharmacy records and Dr. Peterson's cooperation. Speaking of cooperation, Martinez smiled grimly. Dr. Peterson is about to receive a visit from federal agents with search warrants. Medical professionals facing federal prosecution often become very talkative about conspiracy participants. I felt the familiar satisfaction of watching federal law enforcement operate with methodical precision. What about Jonathan Blackwood, the lawyer who helped forge documents? Already under surveillance, Agent Wong replied. He's been using the same forger for multiple clients. We're building a racketeering case that will encompass his entire criminal operation. Martinez gathered the prosecution files I'd prepared. Dorothy, your evidence organization has accelerated our timeline significantly. Normally, financial fraud investigations require months of documentation review. You've provided everything we need for immediate prosecution. When will you arrest Marcus? Friday morning? We want him to believe his plan succeeded completely before federal agents appear with arrest warrants. Agent Wong leaned forward. Are you prepared for the media attention? This case will attract significant coverage due to the elder abuse and Medicare fraud angles. I spent 30 years in federal courtrooms watching justice operate efficiently, I replied. Eleanor deserves to have her story told accurately, and other elderly victims need to see that financial predators can be stopped. As the task force meeting concluded, I realized that my 30 years of federal court experience had prepared me perfectly for this moment. Not just to defend myself against false accusations, but to ensure that a dying woman's fears about her son's betrayal resulted in complete justice. Marcus Thompson had fatally underestimated an opponent who understood exactly how federal prosecution operates. Thursday evening, Marcus Thompson made the mistake that would seal his fate forever. I was reviewing final evidence preparations when my surveillance system chimed with an unexpected alert. Marcus had returned to the mansion with someone I didn't recognize, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit carrying a medical bag. Through the hidden cameras, I watched them enter Eleanor's former bedroom, now stripped of her personal belongings, but still containing the furniture where she'd spent her final weeks. Marcus gestured emphatically while the stranger examined the nightstand where Eleanor had kept her medications. This is where the old lady kept everything, Marcus was saying. Pills, medical records, that stupid recording device she thought I didn't know about. Recording device. My pulse quickened. Marcus knew about Eleanor's documentation efforts, which meant he'd been monitoring her activities during her final weeks. The stranger opened his medical bag and removed several pill bottles. These should dissolve any remaining pharmaceutical residues in the wood grain. If there's ever an investigation, they'll find nothing. Dr. Peterson is getting nervous, Marcus replied. Says federal investigators have been asking questions about Medicare billing irregularities. We need to make sure nothing connects back to the medication timeline. I grabbed my transcription notebook and began recording their conversation in shorthand, my fingers moving with the speed developed over 30 years of federal court proceedings. What about the domestic worker? The stranger asked. Dorothy. She'll be convicted of theft next week. My attorney says her public defender is pushing for a plea bargain. Once she's in prison, anything she might say about Mom's suspicions will be dismissed as desperate lies from a convicted criminal. Convicted criminal. The casual certainty in Marcus's voice revealed how completely he'd underestimated my actual background and capabilities. The stranger continued his work, applying chemical solutions to surfaces where Eleanor's medications had been prepared. Your mother suspected something toward the end, didn't she? Mom got paranoid during the chemo treatments. Started hiding pills, pretending to take her evening medications. She even accused me of trying to poison her. Marcus laughed bitterly. Ironically, she wasn't wrong. There it was. A direct confession to poisoning Eleanor Thompson, recorded in high definition, and documented by someone who understood exactly how to preserve evidence for federal prosecution. The insulin injections were the most effective method, Marcus continued. Mom was diabetic, so additional insulin appeared medical rather than suspicious. Dr. Peterson documented everything as treatment complications. Insulin, a nearly undetectable murder weapon that would cause organ failure resembling natural disease progression. Even if Eleanor's body were exhumed, proving insulin poisoning months after death would be nearly impossible. The cremation eliminated any remaining evidence, the stranger noted. Except for this room. Mom spent her final weeks here, and pharmaceutical residues can linger longer than people realize. FBI forensics teams are very thorough when they're investigating Medicare fraud. FBI forensics teams. Marcus knew federal investigators were involved, yet he continued his criminal activities with reckless confidence. My phone rang suddenly, and both men froze. I muted the surveillance audio and answered. Dorothy, it's David Hernandez, your attorney. I have good news about your case. I kept my voice confused and elderly. Good news? The prosecution's timeline has fallen apart. They can't place you at the scene during the alleged theft dates. We might be able to get all charges dismissed. That's wonderful, David. Does this mean Marcus was wrong about what happened? It means their case has serious problems. We're meeting tomorrow morning to discuss next steps. After hanging up, I returned to the surveillance feed. Marcus was pacing frantically while the stranger packed his chemical equipment. If the theft charges get dismissed, Dorothy might start talking about Mom's suspicions, Marcus muttered. We need insurance against that possibility. What kind of insurance? Marcus walked to Eleanor's former jewelry box and removed a small vial of clear liquid. Dr. Peterson synthesized this for emergencies. Tasteless, odorless, undetectable after 48 hours. If Dorothy becomes a problem, we can solve it permanently. The stranger stepped back nervously. Marcus, that's murder. I agreed to help with evidence cleanup, not killing witnesses. It would look like a heart attack. Elderly woman, stress of false accusations, weak constitution. Very believable. I stared at the screen in shock. Marcus wasn't just planning to frame me for theft. He was preparing to murder me if the legal strategy failed. Besides, Marcus continued, Dorothy lives alone in that shabby apartment in Culver City. No family, no close friends except my dead mother. Who would even notice if she passed away from natural causes? Wrong again, Marcus. I had federal agents monitoring my safety. A U.S. attorney building prosecution cases based on my evidence. And 30 years of courthouse colleagues who would definitely notice if something happened to me. But Marcus's confession to murdering Eleanor, combined with his threat against my life, provided the final piece of evidence Agent Wong needed for federal arrest warrants. I saved the surveillance recording and immediately called Patricia Wong's secure line. Patricia, it's Dorothy. Marcus just confessed to murdering Eleanor with insulin injections and threatened to kill me with an undetectable poison if the theft charges are dismissed. We're moving up the arrest timeline. Federal agents will be in position by 6 a.m. tomorrow. Dorothy, do not return to your apartment tonight. Check into a hotel and stay there until we give the all clear. He knows about the FBI investigation, Patricia. Someone's been leaking information about federal involvement. We'll investigate that separately. Right now, your safety is the priority. As I packed an overnight bag, I realized that Marcus's arrogance had finally destroyed him completely. His confession to Eleanor's murder, documented threats against my life, and evidence tampering activities provided everything needed for life imprisonment. Tomorrow morning, Marcus Thompson would discover that threatening a federal court clerk was the last and most fatal error of his criminal career. Friday morning arrived with the precision of federal law enforcement. I stood in the Thompson mansion's marble foyer at exactly 6 a.m., no longer the confused elderly domestic worker Marcus had dismissed so carelessly. Agent Patricia Wong flanked my right side, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez on my left, and a dozen federal agents positioned throughout the house. Marcus descended the grand staircase in his silk pajamas, expecting to find his usual empty house. Instead, he found the full weight of the United States justice system waiting for him. What the hell is this? He stopped halfway down the stairs, his face shifting from confusion to growing alarm. I removed my reading glasses and looked up at him with the calm confidence I'd developed through 30 years of federal courtroom experience. "Good morning, Marcus. Believe you know Agent Wong from the FBI Financial Crimes Division." "Dorothy." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in jail for stealing jewelry that was never stolen." I interrupted, my voice now carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades organizing federal prosecutions. "Jewelry that was actually in Eleanor's safety deposit box the entire time you were accusing me of theft." Agent Wong stepped forward with federal arrest warrants. "Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and first-degree murder in the death of Eleanor Thompson." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Murder? That's impossible. My mother died of cancer. You can't prove—" "Actually, we can." I opened the briefcase I'd carried for 15 years as Eleanor's companion, but now it contained meticulously organized federal evidence instead of household management documents. "Thanks to your confession last night about using insulin injections to accelerate Eleanor's death." Marcus gripped the staircase railing. "What confession?" I activated my laptop and turned the screen toward him. His own voice filled the foyer. "The insulin injections were the most effective method. Mom was diabetic, so additional insulin appeared medical rather than suspicious." "You were recording me?" The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. "Marcus, I spent 30 years as a federal court clerk, transcribing wiretap investigations and organizing evidence for complex prosecution cases. Did you really think I'd let you frame me without conducting my own investigation?" Agent Wong began reading Miranda rights, while federal agents searched every room of the mansion. Marcus stared at me with dawning comprehension of how completely he'd misjudged his opponent. "You're not just Eleanor's housekeeper," he whispered. "I was Eleanor's trusted companion," I corrected. "But before that, I was senior court clerk for Judge Richardson's federal courtroom, specializing in financial crimes and racketeering cases. I know exactly how Medicare fraud investigations operate because I've transcribed hundreds of them." Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez approached with additional federal agents. "We also have arrest warrants for Dr. Peterson and Jonathan Blackwood. Your conspiracy is being dismantled systematically." "This is impossible," Marcus protested. "Dorothy is just a senile old woman who doesn't understand." "Stop." I held up my hand with quiet authority. "Marcus, you've spent months describing me as senile, confused, and helpless. You built your entire criminal strategy around that assumption. But Eleanor knew my real background, which is why she trusted me with her suspicions about your behavior." I pulled out Eleanor's audio recordings and began playing her final testimony. "If something happens to me, Dorothy, please make sure the truth comes out. Marcus isn't just stealing my money. I believe he's hastening my death to get it." Marcus collapsed onto the stairs. "She knew?" "Eleanor suspected you were poisoning her months before she died. She documented everything because she knew someone with federal court experience would understand how to preserve evidence for prosecution." Agent Wong held up the small vial Marcus had shown his accomplice the previous evening. "This contains the same synthetic compound you plan to use on Mrs. Williams. Our forensics team will analyze it along with all pharmaceutical evidence from Eleanor's final months. The Medicare fraud alone carries a 20-year federal sentence," Martinez explained. "Add conspiracy, insurance fraud, and first-degree murder, and you're looking at life imprisonment without possibility of parole." I watched Marcus process the complete destruction of his criminal scheme. "You underestimated me at every step, Marcus. When you accused me of theft, I used surveillance techniques I'd learned from federal wiretap cases. When you dismissed my concerns as elderly confusion, I applied evidence organization methods from 30 years of federal prosecutions. But most importantly," I continued, removing Eleanor's final letter from my briefcase, "when you murdered your mother for her money, you forgot that she'd confided in someone who understood exactly how to ensure justice was served." Federal agents completed their search and began escorting Marcus toward the patrol vehicles. The handcuffs that had humiliated me weeks earlier now secured the man who'd thought he could frame me for his crimes. "Dorothy," Marcus called out desperately, "you don't understand the pressure I was under." The debts, the threats, I understand perfectly. I closed my briefcase with satisfaction. I also understand that financial pressure doesn't justify murdering your mother and attempting to destroy an innocent person's reputation. Agent Wong approached me as Marcus was loaded into the federal transport vehicle. Dorothy, your investigative work was exemplary. Have you ever considered a career change to federal law enforcement? I smiled, watching the man who'd called me a senile old maid disappear behind bulletproof glass. After 30 years in federal court and 15 years caring for Eleanor, I think I'm ready for retirement. But thank you for the compliment. As the federal convoy departed with Marcus and his accomplices, I stood in the empty mansion where Eleanor had spent her final months fearing her son's betrayal. Justice had been methodical, thorough, and absolutely final. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. Thank you, Dorothy, for making sure the truth came out. The federal operation unfolded with the precision I remembered from 30 years of complex prosecutions. By 7 a.m., simultaneous search warrants were being executed across Los Angeles County, Dr. Peterson's medical practice, Jonathan Blackwood's law office, Marcus's apartment, and 3 separate locations connected to the Medicare fraud scheme. I stood in the FBI field office, watching multiple investigation teams coordinate through secure communications. Agent Wong provided real-time updates as evidence was collected from each location. Dr. Peterson's office yielded falsified medical records for 17 different patients, she reported. Medicare fraud investigation estimates over 500,000 in fraudulent billings across the last 2 years. Eleanor Thompson was just one victim in a systematic scheme. Assistant U.S. Attorney Martinez reviewed the initial search results on multiple monitors. Jonathan Blackwood's office contained forged documents for at least a dozen estate modification cases. His document forger has been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise targeting elderly clients. What about Marcus's apartment? I asked. Jackpot. Agent Wong smiled grimly. Financial records showing gambling debts to 3 different Las Vegas casino groups, correspondence with loan sharks threatening physical violence, and detailed plans for liquidating Eleanor's estate to pay creditors. The evidence confirmed everything Eleanor had suspected during her final weeks. Her fears about Marcus's financial desperation and dangerous associations had been completely accurate. The pharmaceutical evidence is particularly damning, reported DEA agent Sarah Coleman, who joined the task force. We found insulin vials with purchase dates corresponding to Eleanor's final month, plus synthetic compounds designed to mimic natural heart failure. Medicare fraud. Investigator James Chen presented his findings on a comprehensive evidence board. The billing scheme spans 18 months and involves fraudulent claims for dozens of elderly patients. Home care services never provided, medical equipment never delivered, treatments never administered. Total fraud, $847,000. Marcus wasn't just targeting his mother, I realized. He was using her Medicare information as part of a larger criminal operation. Exactly, Chen confirmed. Dr. Peterson provided access to patient information for multiple elderly victims. Marcus would submit fraudulent claims using their Medicare numbers, then split the profits with Peterson and Blackwood. Agent Wong activated secure video conferencing with the arrest teams. Dr. Peterson is cooperating fully. Facing federal prosecution, he's providing detailed testimony about the conspiracy. He admits to falsifying Eleanor's medical records and providing Marcus with lethal pharmaceutical compounds. What about the insulin timeline? Martinez asked. Peterson documented administering insulin injections to Eleanor during her final weeks, claiming they were part of her diabetic treatment. But the dosages were far beyond therapeutic levels, designed to cause organ failure that would appear natural. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Eleanor's suspicions about being poisoned had been completely vindicated, but the confirmation of her systematic murder was heartbreaking. Jonathan Blackwood is also cooperating, Agent Wong continued. His forged document operation includes will modifications, insurance applications, and estate transfers for vulnerable elderly clients across Southern California. How many other victims? I asked. At least 30 families affected by fraudulent estate modifications, Blackwood estimates the total financial impact at over $3 million in stolen inheritances. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Eleanor's murder was part of a sophisticated operation targeting elderly Americans through their most trusted relationships. Family members, doctors, and attorneys. The media is requesting information about the case, Martinez noted. This story will have significant impact on elderly protection advocacy and Medicare fraud prevention. Good, I replied firmly. Other families need to understand how financial predators operate, and elderly Americans deserve to know that sophisticated crimes against them will be prosecuted with full federal resources. Agent Wong received an urgent communication through her secure device. Marcus is requesting to speak with you, Dorothy. He wants to negotiate some kind of deal. What kind of deal could he possibly offer? Information about other criminal operations, cooperation with broader investigations. Desperate criminals often try to reduce their sentences through cooperation. Martinez shook her head. Marcus Thompson is facing life imprisonment for first-degree murder. We don't need his cooperation to prosecute this case successfully. Besides, I added, Eleanor deserves justice, not plea bargains that reduce Marcus's accountability for murdering his mother. The final arrest reports confirmed the complete dismantling of the criminal network. Marcus Thompson, Dr. Peterson, Jonathan Blackwood, and 6 additional co-conspirators were in federal custody facing charges that would result in decades of imprisonment. The evidence you provided was instrumental in achieving this outcome, Agent Wong told me. Your documentation methods and surveillance techniques enabled us to build comprehensive federal cases against everyone involved. Eleanor provided the initial evidence through her recordings. I replied, I just applied federal court experience to organize everything for prosecution. Martinez gathered the prosecution files for grand jury presentation. This case will set important precedents for elder abuse prosecution and Medicare fraud investigation. Your methodical approach to evidence preservation will be studied by law enforcement agencies nationwide. As the task force meeting concluded, I realized that Eleanor's trust in my background had enabled justice far beyond her individual case. The federal intervention would protect countless other elderly Americans from similar predatory schemes. What happens next? I asked. Grand jury indictments followed by federal trial proceedings, Martinez explained. Based on the evidence, we expect guilty pleas from most defendants rather than risking life sentences through trial conviction. Agent Wong walked me to the elevator. Dorothy, you've honored your friend's memory and protected vulnerable people across the country. Eleanor would be proud. As I left the federal building, I felt the satisfaction of someone who'd spent a lifetime serving justice finally achieving it for the person who'd mattered most. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse where I'd spent 30 years transcribing justice. But this time, I occupied the witness stand as the prosecution's key witness against Marcus Thompson, watching him face the consequences of underestimating someone whose entire career had been built on understanding how federal law enforcement operates. Mrs. Williams, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Martinez addressed me with the respect I'd earned through meticulous evidence gathering. Please tell the jury how your federal court experience enabled you to document this criminal conspiracy. I looked directly at the jury, speaking with the quiet authority I'd developed through decades of legal proceedings. In 30 years as a federal court clerk, I learned that successful prosecutions depend on methodical documentation, proper evidence preservation, and understanding how criminals reveal themselves through their own arrogance. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, no longer the confident man who'd accused me of theft. Federal prosecution had stripped away his entitled facade, revealing the desperate criminal who'd murdered his mother for money. Mr. Thompson dismissed me as a senile old maid who couldn't possibly understand his sophisticated criminal scheme. I continued. That assumption became his fatal error, because it prevented him from recognizing that he was confessing federal crimes to someone who knew exactly how to preserve evidence for prosecution. The jury listened intently as I explained how Eleanor's final recordings had provided the initial evidence, how surveillance techniques learned from federal wiretap cases had captured Marcus's confessions, and how my experience organizing complex Prosecutions had enabled comprehensive case documentation. Eleanor Thompson trusted me with her fears because she knew my background, would enable me to seek appropriate justice if something happened to her, I testified. She died believing her son was poisoning her. And unfortunately, she was absolutely correct. Martinez presented the evidence I'd systematically gathered: audio recordings, surveillance videos, financial documentation, and the methodical timeline that connected every aspect of Marcus's criminal enterprise. Marcus's defense attorney, overwhelmed by the comprehensive federal case, had already suggested plea negotiations. But Marcus, still clinging to arrogance, had insisted on trial proceedings that were systematically destroying any remaining credibility. Dr. Peterson had accepted a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against Marcus. He provided Marcus with insulin and synthetic compounds, specifically designed to accelerate Eleanor Thompson's death while mimicking natural disease progression, Peterson testified. The murder was premeditated and methodical. Jonathan Blackwood received a 15-year federal sentence for his document forging operation. His cooperation had revealed the massive scope of elder abuse schemes targeting vulnerable Americans across multiple states. The Medicare fraud investigation had recovered over $847,000 in fraudulent billings and identified 37 additional elderly victims. Federal legislation was being developed to strengthen protection protocols based on evidence from Eleanor's case. Has the defendant offered any explanation for his actions? Martinez asked during my testimony. Marcus claimed financial pressure from gambling debts justified his criminal behavior, I replied. But federal court experience taught me that desperation doesn't excuse systematic fraud, document forgery, or murdering one's mother for inheritance money. The trial proceedings moved efficiently toward conviction. Federal prosecutors had built an overwhelming case based on evidence I'd methodically documented, and Marcus's own recorded confessions provided irrefutable proof of guilt. Mrs. Williams, Marcus's defense attorney attempted during cross-examination, isn't it possible that your desire for revenge against my client influenced your interpretation of events? Sir, I spent 30 years transcribing federal cases without personal investment in outcomes, I replied calmly. Evidence speaks for itself when properly documented. Your client murdered Eleanor Thompson, defrauded Medicare, forged legal documents, and attempted to frame me for theft. Those are facts, not interpretations. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder, Medicare fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and attempted witness intimidation. Marcus received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. After sentencing, Agent Patricia Wong found me in the courthouse hallway. Dorothy, your investigative work has influenced federal training protocols for elder abuse cases. Your methods are being taught to agents nationwide. Eleanor deserves the credit, I replied. She had the courage to document her suspicions even while dying. I just applied federal court experience to ensure her evidence achieved appropriate justice. 6 months later, I stood in Eleanor's restored garden behind the Thompson mansion, now converted to a senior center specializing in elder abuse prevention. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation, established with recovered funds from Marcus's criminal enterprise, provided resources for elderly Americans facing financial exploitation. Linda Chen, Eleanor's estate attorney, joined me among the orchids Eleanor had loved. She would be amazed by everything that's resulted from her courage to speak truth about Marcus's behavior. Eleanor always said that experience and wisdom shouldn't be underestimated, I reflected. Marcus learned that lesson too late to save himself. The media had covered the case extensively, inspiring other elderly Americans to report suspicious behavior from family members and caregivers. Federal elder abuse prosecutions had increased significantly, following the precedents established through Eleanor's case. I received letters from families whose loved ones had been protected because Eleanor's story encouraged them to seek help when they recognized similar warning signs. Her final wish for truth had saved countless other elderly Americans from predatory schemes. As I walked through Eleanor's memorial garden, I realized that 30 years of federal court experience had prepared me perfectly for the most important case of my career. Ensuring that a dying woman's fears about her son's betrayal resulted in complete justice and protection for others facing similar threats. Marcus Thompson had fatally underestimated an opponent whose lifetime of experience with federal law enforcement enabled methodical, comprehensive, and absolutely final justice. The lesson was simple but profound. Never underestimate the expertise that comes from a lifetime of professional experience, especially when that experience involves understanding exactly how justice operates.